I was driving home from work one night, taking my usual route home. I got out at midnight, so it was probably 15-ish at this point. My town is pretty quiet and boring. A lot of woods everywhere, and not a lot of people or houses. I was on this road not far from my house with a cornfield on one side and a patch of woods on the other. It was midsummer and like 75 degrees, so I had my convertible top down. I was cruising down the street going like 50 when I heard a loud, blood-curdling woman's scream come from one side of the road, but I couldn't tell which one. I brought the car to a quick halt by slamming on the brakes and listening. There was a woman's cry from the left side, in the woods. She was crying for help. I got out of my car and grabbed the baton from my back seat. I walked towards the woods and called back, "Who is out there?" And the woman immediately called back, "Please help me." I began to run into the woods, swiping all the twigs and bushes out of my way. I yelled out to the woman to keep screaming so I could find her. She'd every 10 seconds or so scream help, and I'd approach in that direction, running, screaming back. But pretty soon, I started to realize no matter how far into the woods I went, the woman's yells didn't seem to get any closer or louder. If anything, they were always the same distance. Even though I was booking it straight in the direction of the screams, I screamed out, "Tell me where you are." And about 5 seconds later, the woman once again screamed out, "Help." I stopped in my tracks. Now, I didn't like this. I started to feel like I was walking into some kind of trap. I turned around and started running back in the direction I came. I ran and ran until I could see the flashing headlights of my car on the side of the road beyond the trees. The whole way back, I still heard the woman's screams, but they were still the same distance no matter how much closer to my car I got, as if she were following me back. Was I being stalked? I got in my car and just drove out of there, completely freaked out. I called 911 to report it to the authorities in case they'd want to investigate it. I wasn't sticking around there, though. I was tired. After telling a few friends and family about the strange encounter, I was ready to move on with my life. But a week later, I saw something on the news that made me sick to my stomach. The dead body of a 30-something-year-old woman was found in the woods by a man hiking with his dog. Oddly, there were no signs of foul play. The location that the body was reported to have been found was the same general area where I heard the screams. While that patch of woods is very big, I can't help but feel that would be a huge coincidence. I was driving from Brooklyn to Vermont to my friend John's cabin to have a weekend of snowboarding. I had my snowboarding gear in the bed of the truck. I was about 45 minutes from my buddy's cabin at this point. It was late, like 10 p.m. It was pitch black on these roads and it was snowing. There were like no other cars on the road up there besides me at that hour. I had just gotten my truck back from the mechanic a few weeks ago. I frequently had problems with that truck, and that night was no exception. At perhaps the worst possible time, on the quietest, darkest road, suddenly my engine starts to completely overheat into the red zone. I slow down and pull onto the side, and I wait for it to cool down again. Then I slowly got back on the road, but even at a slow speed, the needle went back up to the red, and the engine was overheating again. I had to pull over and turn off the truck. I went under the hood to try and diagnose the problem, but I couldn't in the dark and the snow. I had to call John. On this road, the reception for T-Mobile was non-existent. I couldn't even call for help. In the moment, I felt screwed. I went into the truck to turn it on again and at least wait in the heat of the truck as it idled. It didn't seem to overheat while idling. I tried one more time to drive, but the same thing happened again, so I had to wait like 10 minutes before I saw a car passing. I had my hazards on, and I opened the door and waved my arms. The passing car stopped. It was some little Toyota. The guy rolled his window down, and I thanked him for stopping and asked if I could use his phone. He asked what happened. I told him my truck was overheating and was undrivable. He then asked me if I'm all alone. I paused for a second and said yeah. He reached for his cell phone and handed it to me. He must have been a local because he had bars. I called my friend John. He picked up and I asked him what I should do. He told me to call the specific towing company nearby and that he'd come and pick me up. I gave him my exact location and he said he was going to head over. After that, I called the towing company he gave me and requested assistance. During both phone calls, the guy in his car watched me the whole time. I tried to not look back, though. After my phone calls, I handed the man back his phone and thanked him. He said, "You're welcome." And without saying anything else, he rolled up his window and drove down the snowy road into the darkness ahead. I watched as his taillights disappeared completely as he descended below the top of the hilly road above. I was once again alone. I got back into my idling truck to be in the warmth. I flicked the headlights off for a second just to get an idea of how dark it was out. And when I say I couldn't see an inch outside the windows, I'm not exaggerating. It was pure blackness. I sat in the truck waiting and waiting. I couldn't even do anything that needed an internet connection. I resorted to playing games on my phone for 20 minutes until there was a bang in my passenger side window. I jumped out of my skin as I looked to the window. I couldn't see much of the person. It was too dark outside, and the headlights didn't really light up the sides of the truck. I heard a man's voice started begging for help. He was yelling at me to open the door. He was freezing. I heard him trying to open the door himself, but it was locked. I shied my flashlight to the window, but it barely helped, and seeing who was out there, all I saw was someone in a really big black coat with the hood over his head. I yelled back, "What's wrong?" And the mysterious man outside replied, saying he's lost and stranded and needs to get out of the cold. I didn't trust this. I sat there nervously trying to figure out what to ask him to prove he's not someone looking to harm me. I didn't even figure out what to say before he started aggressively trying to still open the locked door and then started pounding on the glass even harder, still screaming for help. In the heat of the moment, I decided to listen to my gut. I put the truck in drive, and he realized this and started pounding harder on the window to break it. I drove the truck onto the road and brought it up to 30 miles per hour despite the damage I was surely doing to the overheating engine. But then I saw something that I didn't expect that made me feel like my heart skipped a beat. As I came over the hill in the road, I noticed the reflection of taillights approaching me on the side of the road. As I passed the parked car, I realized it was that same Toyota from earlier, the one that the man was driving. I slowed down and lowered the window to see if the man was in the car, and my taillights lit up footprints in the snow, meaning that man who was banging on my window was him, and he was trying to trick me into opening the door to do who knows what. I kept driving my truck, knowing full well I was fucking up the engine, but I didn't care at that point. I pulled over a few minutes later when I saw headlights approaching on the other side, and I wanted to cheer in excitement when I realized it was the tow truck. I flashed my lights and he pulled to the side. As the driver came out, I told him about what just happened. He joked that he got there at the right time. Then he asked if the guy had a gun or anything on him, but I told him I couldn't see. He replied, "Well, then we better do this quick." It took him about 15 minutes to get the truck attached, and in that time, the Toyota never passed us. It was possible he turned around and went the other way for this exact reason. I used the tow truck driver's phone to call John again and tell him to just meet us at the body shop. To summarize the rest, John and I still went snowboarding that weekend, and the body shop replaced the broken water pump in my truck, causing the overheating. I sold that truck a few weeks later. I'm glad I didn't lower my window or unlock the doors to that man trying to get into my car. In that setting, I could have been murdered, and no one would have ever known who had done it. It had been a long day, and I was finally on my way home from the beach after spending the day with my friends for one of their birthdays. I couldn't wait to be home, but I knew that there was a long drive ahead of me, so I stocked up on stuff to snack on and a coffee to keep myself awake for the drive. I drank the coffee too fast, though, and by the time I was halfway through my drive at around 9 at night, I found myself having to use the bathroom. I started looking off to the side of the road to see if there was maybe a good place to stop when I noticed a small group of bushes off the side of the road. I pulled over and made sure that no one would see me as I ran out to use the bathroom, and in no time I was making my way back to the car when out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that made me stop. I looked to my left and took a step back as my eyes locked onto the silhouette of something standing off in the field that I was walking through to get back to my car. I stood there trying to figure out what it was, but all I could make out was a pair of reflective eyes that let me know that whatever or whoever it was looking right back at me. I tried to keep my cool and think about what I should do, but I realized I didn't have much time when the figure started moving. It took me a second to realize, but sure enough, it was walking right at me. I slowly started moving and walking to my car as I kept my eyes locked on the shadow, and it did the same. I noticed that it wasn't moving much faster than I was when I saw that it was already halfway to me, and I hadn't made it close to my car yet. That was when I decided to just make a run for it. I took off and sprinted back to my car as fast as I could, and as I got close, I could hear the footsteps of my pursuer getting closer and closer. I opened the car door and practically dove inside before slamming it shut. I hoped that would be enough as I started fumbling around for my keys, which I left in the cup holder, but was horrified when I heard the sound of the door click and start to open. I looked over to the window and let out a loud scream as I realized that I was being chased by a person. I quickly grabbed the handle on the inside of the door and pulled it shut before locking it. My eyes widened as I looked at their clothes and realized that they were wearing a jumpsuit that looked like it had numbers on the upper left chest pocket. That was when I remembered a sign that I had passed a few miles back that read, "Prison area, don't pick up hitchhikers." I did my best to get my keys into the ignition and turn my car on as the man tried to open the door. Once he realized it and the door behind it was locked, he tried to punch through the glass, but lucky for me, my car started and I managed to pull away from the side of the road. I stepped on the gas and tore down the road as fast as I could before I finally pulled over and called the police. I let them know that I was pretty sure that I just had a run-in with an escaped convict and told them where I was. I had to wait for an officer to make a statement, but then they sent me on my way. I tried to drive the rest of the way home following the speed limit, but I admit, I just wanted to get back to the safety of my own house, so I got there as fast as I could. I tell you, I'll never forget that tribe ever again. I was on my way home from work one night, driving down the usual road that I took to get home, and I was surprised to see that there was actually another car on it. It was around 1 in the morning, and by that time the road was typically empty. I started to slow down a bit as I approached the car and noticed that they were driving at a really slow pace. The road was a 45, but they were going no faster than 20 miles per hour. I drove behind them for a minute, but when I saw that I was legally allowed to pass them, I checked to make sure it was safe, and then I sped up and began to drive right by them. But as I passed by the driver's side of their car, it was like I could sense the mood and the air change. The hair on my arm started to stand up, and I almost jumped out of my seat as I heard the roar of their engine get louder as they presumably stepped on the gas to speed up. I looked over at them and realized that they weren't going to let me pass, so I decided to slow back down and try to get back behind them. But as my car slowed down, so did theirs. They were matching my speed, and before I could figure out what to do next, I was surprised when I felt a hard slam from the passenger side of my car. They had just run into me. I tried to pull away from them as I noticed that they were getting ready to ram me again, but I couldn't do anything to stop them. I felt my car move to the side a bit, and it was hard to keep control of the steering wheel as they slammed into me again. After that, I slammed on the brakes and came to a complete stop, which caused them to pass by me. I sat in the middle of the road for a second, as I hoped that it was all over, but I didn't have much time to recover as I noticed that the other car had also come to a stop. I looked up and saw that they were starting to reverse back toward me. My heart began to pound and I didn't know what I should do. All I could think was to try to get away from them, so as they backed up toward me, I pulled forward as fast as I could and passed right by them. I didn't let up with my speed as I tore over the pavement, constantly checking my rearview mirror. I knew that they were following me. I just didn't know how far behind me they were. I took a second to pull my phone out of my pocket and called the cops to let them know that I was being chased by an aggressive driver. They told me to pull over and wait for the police, but I couldn't risk it as I noticed their headlights continuing to get closer. I put the pedal to the floor and continued driving as fast as I could, and even though I wasn't putting distance between us, I could tell that they weren't getting any closer. And finally, I had made it far enough around a bend that I couldn't see the headlights anymore. I took the opportunity that I had in front of me and quickly pulled off the main road and drove about 10 feet down a side trail and quickly turned my car off. I held my breath and hoped that the other car would just pass by and not notice that I was hiding, and after a minute, I was relieved to see it work. I saw the other car drive by, and they were going at least 50 miles per hour at that point. Once I was safe, I called the police and updated them on my location, which is where they met me. They took my statement, and then one of the officers was nice enough to escort me home. After that night, I decided to take the main road to my house, even if it means dealing with a little more traffic after a long day of work. It's better than dealing with a random road rage incident, that's for sure. It's better than dealing with a random road rage incident, that's for sure.